Greg here. Before we begin today's episode, I just want to mention for those of you who might follow us on Place to Be Nation Pop, you might be aware that back in the late 2010s to early 2020s, I did a series of top 10 shows for the greatest WWE projects list on Place to Be Nation with Robert Silva, and I was informed by the Our Vantage Point Retro Wrestling podcast group that Robert passed away earlier this week. So, Robert, I want to say, God bless. I'm going to miss you. And one day on this podcast, we will cover Elvis and the Beauty Queen. You requested it, and I'm going to make sure that sometime within the next year, we will eventually get to it onto the podcast. So, I'm going to miss all the conversations we had regarding everything with WWE back in the day and some of the great wrestlers of all time that you got to see at the Garden. Man, God bless you. I'm going to miss you. So now let's get on with our topic for today's episode as we talk about Nearly Departed with Eric Idle.
An anthology on the bad, the short-lived, and the forgotten shows and events in television history. This is It Was a Thing on TV.
C would write poetry, believe it or not. Therefore, our continuing champions are the Hunts with 300 with how many points, I don't know.
Episode 510. Submission number 2599. Nearly Departed. Nearly Departed aired on the NBC television network from April 10th to May 1st, 1989, for 6 episodes, 2 of which went unaired.
Everyone lately is making me crazy. Now that we've joined the deceased, there'll be no resting in peace. Nearly departed, stumbling cockeyed, the moment that rock slide came tumbling down on our heads. Maybe we're better off dead, nearly departed. It's hard to ignore when a family of 4 is running amok in our home. They're constantly near us, they can't see or hear us, nobody can, except the old man, just pushing up daisies. We're halfway to Hades and halfway to heaven above. Nothing like being in love, dear, nearly departed.
I gotta begin this Halloween story with a story about a novel named Topper. It is about a young rich couple in love who happens to be in a car crash and killed. Their friend, who is neither young nor rich, turns out to be the only one who can see them. This lighthearted adult romp was turned into a movie in 1937 starring Constance Bennett and Cary Grant as the young couple in love and Roland Young as Cosmo Topper, the only person who can see them. There was a movie series, there was also a TV series, and then there was sort of a spiritual successor, and this was 35 years, give or take, before Utkarsh Ambudkar and Rose McIver ever entered the picture. So Roger Schulman and John Baskin create this spiritual successor to the Topper series, focusing on another young couple in love, English professor Grant Pritchard and his wife Claire. They're young, they're rich, they're reckless, and before the show, as you heard in the open, they are also quite dead. They manage to return home, but only as ghosts. And there are strangers in their house. A plumbing contractor and executor to the estate, Mike Dooley, his wife Liz, his son Derek, and his father, Grandpa Jack. Funny thing happened on the way to the grave, though. It turns out Grandpa Jack, probably because he's so close to the grave anyway, he's the only one who can see Grant and Claire. In exchange for continuing to live in the house as ghosts, the Pritchards would mediate through Grandpa Jack as their familiar, trying to help the Dooleys with their problems. Hilarity ensues. Playing Grant Pritchard, a comic genius if ever there was one, Monty Python's Eric Idle. And playing his wife Claire from Benson, Caroline McWilliams. And then we go into the Dooleys. Two of them should be very familiar. Playing Mike Dooley, Stuart Pankin from Not Necessarily the News and Dinosaurs.
Yeah, Earl Sinclair. And let's just say it again for the 9,000th time. Those weren't steroids, they were thornoids.
And why is that?
Because you can't say it at like 8:30 on ABC on Friday night, even though the word steroid was in the title of the episode.
But also, another reason, it's Jim Henson. You got to keep that clean Jim Henson image.
Playing Mike's wife, Liz, Wendy Schaal, a.k.a. Francine on American Dad.
In addition to American Dad, she was on Making a Living that first season. She didn't make it to syndication. She was only on the first 13 episodes, the ones that aired on ABC. So she didn't get to work with Crystal Bernard, who was only working there to pay the rent.
Well, see, Rand.
I want to see Rand.
Playing their son, Derek Dooley, Jay Lambert. He was in 2 episodes of 30-something and 4 episodes of The Wonder Years around this time. And also the movie Pump Up the Volume, if you remember that. And playing the only person in the world who can see the Pritchards, Grandpa Jack, Henderson Forsyth, best known, at least during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, for 189 episodes as Dr. David Stewart on As the World Turns.
Probably best known for that, but he was on 13 episodes, and this may be a future cover because this is another one of those series from the late 80s that I think CBS thought would be a really big thing, and it wasn't. Maybe in the same sort of vein as Frank's Place, but he played who I'm going to guess is the father to one of the 2 title characters, Barnett Lutz, in the TV series Eisenhower and Lutz. I vaguely remember it, but I really do remember it being pushed in TV Guide and different media outlets as like one of the big must-see shows on CBS in 1988, and it just petered out.
That was the show. They pitched it to the network, and NBC gave it the plush mid-season placing right after another fantastic show of the 80s, Alf.
We'll get to that later when we talk about the ratings and the schedule.
But right now, let's talk about the episodes. Episode 1, Grant meets Grandpa. When Grandpa Jack moves in, the deceased Grant and Claire soon realize that he can see them. Grandpa agrees to hit the road if his new ghost friends can help him pass his driver's test. And in turn, if he passes, they can stay. Because obviously this house means a lot to him. Playing Leona, who I'm guessing was an employee of the DMV, Jeanette Dubois from Good Times. Episode 2, Adventures in Babysitting. Jack asks Grant to watch Derek, who invites a girl over the moment that his grandfather walks out the door. Episode 3, Altered States. Spelled alter, ALTARED, states. When a box of old possessions surfaces, Claire discovers Grant's divorce wasn't finalized until a month after they were wed.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Now I have a question. How in the world are you going to remedy this if you're dead? Episode 4, TV or not TV? TV privileges are revoked when Derek's grades drop, which sends Grant into a tizzy, so he follows the boy to school to get to the root of the problem. I'll say this right now. Ghosts did it better. I just want to bring this name up because it's fun to say. Playing Mrs. Schultz in this episode, Anita Dangler.
I bet you do need a dangler. Jeez.
Oh my god.
She was that woman from That Thing in the 80s. She was in episodes of Small Wonder, Punky Brewster, and Webster. She did the triple. Here come the 2 episodes that were never aired. But apparently, capsules do exist, so let's talk about them. Episode 5, Grandpa's Date. Love is in the air as Mike fixes up Jack with one of his clients, and Derek tries to woo a girl at school. I'm guessing the client in question is Helen McCormick, played by Anne Haney, best known as Mrs. Sellner in Mrs. Doubtfire, among other roles, and was also on 8 episodes of Movie Stars with Harry Hamlin.
In addition, we have a character named Ralph in this episode, played by Ralph Manza. He is that guy from That Thing, going all the way back to the 60s. The place I best remember him from, he played a character called Bud on 18 episodes of Newhart in the 80s. And actually, his career goes beyond the 60s. It actually goes all the way back to 1954. But he did everything. And I think we've talked about him in the past. His name does sound familiar.
Going into the last episode, Grant's aunt. Grant's eccentric Aunt Millie arrives for a visit, completely oblivious to the fact that he is dead.
We do have a name in this episode in the form of Dr. Clay Paxton. He was played by Jack Bannon. Where you know Jack Bannon from? Actually, 2 places, and we talked about him in the past. He played Buck Williams on Trauma Center with Lou Ferrigno back in 83, but also he played Art Donovan on Lou Grant. Kind of interesting. He played characters with the names of 2 somewhat famous athletes. Art Donovan, the defensive tackle for the Baltimore Colts, and Buck Williams would have actually been probably a rookie around that time with the New Jersey Nets, a power forward.
Now hold on. If he was playing Art Donovan, did he ask on whatever show? What was the show he was on as Art Donovan?
That would be Lou Grant.
Okay. Did he ask Lou Grant at Asner how much somebody at the office weighed? If you know, you know.
Well, I know, and I'm sure people out there know, but yeah, that's going to be your takeaway. But also, I mentioned Jack Bannon, not just for the 2 shows I talked about that he was on, but also, given his name, no, he was not on Canon, which was
a Quinn Martin production.
So Bannon was not on Canon. And actually, he was on no Quinn Martin productions. Oh, darn.
I have an amazing discovery. There's a reason why we don't have an actress for Aunt Millie. Aunt Millie is played by Eric Idle in drag.
Why?
Because it's Monty Python, damn it. NBC aired this show out of Elf, and it went absolutely nowhere. Not even gonna lie.
Well, we got reasons for that. Partially, I think it's because the show that it replaced, this is a mid-season replacement, it replaced the Hogan family. And oddly enough, after this series got canceled, what was it replaced by? The Hogan family. Apparently, they're showing summer reruns, I would guess, since this show only lasted till early May of '89. But if we take a look at the schedule, there may be a little bit more to why this show didn't last. As Chico mentioned earlier, this show aired at the 8:30 time slot on Mondays, just after Alf. On CBS, it went up against a comedy, a new comedy at this point, called Heartland. Heartland had two primary actors. One of them was Brian Keith, who I don't really associate with comedies, even though he was in Family Affair. I remember more for Hardcastle and McCormick personally. But the second person, and I think Greg's going to get a reaction out of this, Richard Gilliland from Just Our Luck.
Oh, that's terrific. Now, I should note, Heartland, not to be confused with the Canadian drama of the same name that you can see on any fast service.
It was a comedy that only lasted 10 episodes. So you're not watching it on a fast channel. You're not seeing it anywhere, probably. That was CBS. The competition wasn't terribly tough there. But if we go to ABC, it went up against the second half hour of MacGyver. That would be difficult going up against the second half hour of MacGyver. But actually, if we look at the ratings, it may paint a little bit different picture. I have 3 weeks worth of ratings. I have the ratings for the second episode, the third episode, and the final episode. So that would be 2, 3, and 4. Don't have the first episode. The second week, Nearly Departed was 30th. Tied for 30th, actually, with Full House. And that was out of 47 shows. So we're looking at roughly bottom third. If we look at the ratings for some of the shows related to Nearly Departed, Alf actually finished 21st that week. The drop-off was only 1.5 million viewers, about 10%, not even 10%. But if we look at MacGyver that week, believe it or not, actually finished below Nearly Departed, 36th. If we look at ratings for the third episode, Nearly Departed ranked 42nd out of 60 shows. Alf was 37th, so it was only 5 spots higher. And for this episode, only 1 million viewers were lost. So realistically, it was about a 7% audience loss. MacGyver that week, believe it or not, is right between Alf and Nearly Departed. It was 39th for the week. So the ratings aren't really that bad going up against MacGyver. And then for the final episode, Nearly Departed was tied for 45th with Falcon Crest. And that's out of 84 shows. Alf that week was ranked 25th, so 20 spots higher. And the drop in viewership, oh, this is painful. 2.6 million people. So just doing some quick percentages in my head, that is probably about a 30% drop in viewership. That's not good retention. MacGyver was 34th overall for the week. Heartland was actually 55th. So it was second in its time spot, but still 45th out of 84 shows. That's bottom half. And it looked like this show was filler for the Hogans. So maybe it shouldn't really be a huge surprise that this was 6 episodes and done.
The 4 episodes that did air and the 2 episodes that did not air were never released to home video, but episodes do exist on the internet if you know where to look. Nobody's career was done in by this show. It didn't last long enough to be a career killer. Eric Idle, funny as ever. After this show, I believe he was recruited by the Walt Disney Company to become the face of Journey into Imagination. Stuart Pankin would go on to Dinosaurs. Wendy Shaw would go on to American Dad, among other things. And the idea of a familiar becoming familiar with a whole bunch of ghosts, well, let's just say a good idea never dies.
Yeah, you just probably need like maybe that one guy from furry guy and that one woman who played a Power Ranger.
And a whole bunch of Broadway types as a whole bunch of ghosts. Also, you need to cut a big fat check to the BBC. But while that show is going on its 4th season, which just started and is awesome, Nearly Departed on NBC had a genius at the helm a little bit before its time. Unfortunately, it just became a very spectral thing on TV.
You can find us at our website, itwasathingontv.com, on Facebook at It Was a Thing on TV Podcast, and elsewhere at It Was a Thing on TV. You can find us on any podcast player, and we're also on YouTube, where you can subscribe to our channel to keep up to date with our releases, including what's coming up next time. We're going to talk about another show from NBC in 1979. We've talked about so many winners from that network and that year in the past. We've talked about Turnabout, one of our, I can't say it with a straight face, favorite shows. It was bad. And we've talked about Hello Larry, which was better. And we also talked about Supertrain, which was epically bad. This show maybe wasn't bad like those shows, but its run was similarly long compared to those shows. But it had a good cast, and it had a great production staff. You think I'm going to say a bad thing about
A Quinn Martin production.
I'm not. I'm sorry, this show was not a Quinn Martin production. It was
A QM production.
We'll just have to figure out what show we're talking about, and we're not talking about Barnaby Jones or Cannon or Streets of San Francisco. We'll find out what I'm talking about on Monday, right here at It Was a Thing on TV. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to vote, please. Don't forget to vote. And we'll see you here on Monday with that episode.
Row!
Sounds like you're in pain there.